I still remember the exact way the light fell through the courtroom windows that morning. Cold, flat, the kind of light that doesn't flatter anyone. I was 37 years old, sitting at a table across from the man I had built my entire adult life with, watching him smile at his attorney like he had already won. And maybe he thought he had. Maybe in that moment, Cedric Lamont Mercer genuinely believed that I was going to sit there quietly the way I had always sat quietly and let him take everything.
He leaned toward his lawyer and said something low.
They both laughed. I looked down at the folder in my hands. 82 pages, 14 years of experience, 10 months of work. He always said I was good at counting other people's numbers. He just never stopped to consider that I had been counting his. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is, because I need to know who is up with me for this one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it now. Trust me. You are going to want to hear every single second of this. Let me take you back. Back to the night his phone buzzed at 2 a.m, because that one message changed everything, just not the way he planned. My name is Renata Joelle Mercer, and for 11 years I believed I had built something real. Not perfect. I was never naive enough to think anything was perfect, but real, solid. The kind of life you look at on a Sunday morning and feel grateful for down in your bones. We lived in Myers Park, Charlotte, North Carolina, a 3-bedroom house on Selwyn Avenue with a magnolia tree in the front yard that bloomed every April like it was showing off. I had picked that house. I had found it on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 client calls, pulled up the listing on my phone, and texted Cedric the address with one word. This one. He drove by after work, called me from the driveway and said,
"Baby, you always know."
We closed 30 days later. That was the version of us I held on to for a long time. The version where I always knew and he always listened. I am a senior financial auditor, have been for 14 years, the last 6 at a firm called Caldwell & Associates off South Tryon Street. What that means in plain language is that companies hire me to go through their books and find what does not belong. Discrepancies, patterns that look normal until you know what to look for, hidden transfers, numbers that tell one story on the surface and an entirely different one underneath. I am very good at my job. I say that not to brag. I say it because later, when people ask me how I missed what was happening in my own house, I had to sit with that question for a long time. And the honest answer is this: I am trained to be skeptical of strangers. I had never once turned that same eye on the man who slept beside me every night. I trusted him the way you trust the floor beneath your feet. You do not audit the floor, you just walk on it. Cedric Lamont Mercer, 43 years old, 6 feet, even broad shoulders, the kind of easy smile that made people in restaurants lean toward him without realizing they were doing it. He had a warmth about him that felt effortless. He remembered birthdays. He remembered your mother's name and your dog's name and the name of the city where you grew up. People loved him immediately. I had loved him immediately. We met at a dinner party in Plaza Midwood in the spring 11 years ago. He was talking to someone across the room and he laughed at something, this full, unguarded laugh. And I thought, whoever that man is, he is not performing. That was what got me, the apparent absence of performance. He was at the time a business development manager at a logistics firm.
"Ambitious?"
he said.
"Building toward something."
He said. I believed him. In the early years, I had no reason not to. He worked long hours. He came home tired but present. He showed up to Solange's school events, coached her soccer team one season, fixed things around the house on Saturday mornings with the radio playing. Solange, my daughter, our daughter. 12 years old, all long legs and opinions with my eyes and his laugh. She was the best of both of us, and for a long time that felt like proof that the marriage itself was good. Like she was evidence. I think about that now, using a child as evidence of a marriage's health, and I understand how wrong that kind of thinking is. Children do not validate adults. But back then, looking at Solange made it easy to overlook things. Made it easy to say we are fine. Look at what we made together. My best friend is Nadine Okafor. We met our freshman year at UNC Charlotte, assigned to the same study group for Introduction to Accounting, which neither of us wanted to be in at 8 in the morning. We have been inseparable since. She is a family law attorney now with her own practice on East Boulevard, and she is the sharpest person I know. Sharper than me maybe in the ways that matter most. Nadine never fully trusted Cedric. She was never rude about it. She came to our dinners, she laughed at his jokes, she bought him birthday gifts. But once about 4 years into the marriage, we were sitting on my back porch after everyone had gone home, and she looked at me over her wine glass and said very quietly,
Ren, I don't know what it is, but something about that man sits wrong with me. I can't explain it. Just keep your eyes open, okay?
I told her she was being paranoid. I told her Cedric was one of the good ones. She nodded, set down her glass, and never brought it up again. I've thought about that conversation every single day since everything fell apart. There were also Rochelle in the Sunday dinners. Joelle Mercer, Cedric's mother. 61 years old, immaculate at all times, the kind of woman who arrived to casual dinners in pressed linen and expected the table to be set properly. We had a real relationship, she and I, or at least I believed we did. She taught me how to make her sweet potato pie. She called me baby in the way that felt genuine. When Solange was born, Rochelle cried in the hospital room and held her granddaughter for 40 minutes straight. I loved her. I want to be clear about that because what she did later is harder to understand if you do not first understand that I genuinely loved that woman. Our life had a rhythm. Weekday mornings, I was up at 5:45 coffee, made Solange's lunch, packed out the door by 7:15. Evenings, whoever got home first started dinner. Weekends, farmer's market on Saturday, Rochelle's house on Sunday. Cedric and I had our routines, our inside jokes, our favorite booth at a Thai restaurant on Park Road we went to on the last Friday of every month. I was not unhappy. That is the part that is hardest to explain to people. I was not unhappy. I was not lying awake at night with a bad feeling. I was living my life, doing my work, raising my daughter, loving my husband. And then on a quiet Tuesday in late September, I noticed the first thing. We were at dinner, just the three of us, a regular Wednesday pasta on the stove, and Cedric reached for his wallet to look for a rewards card, and I caught a glimpse of the bills inside. Thick, all cash. He traveled with cards. He had always traveled with cards. I had teased him once about being the last person alive who carried a physical wallet, and he had laughed and said old habits. But cash like that, folded and thick, that was not an old habit. That was new. He found his card, put the wallet away, and said something to Solange about her math test. I stirred the pasta. I said nothing, but I noticed. And somewhere beneath the surface of the life I thought I was living, something shifted. Just barely, just enough. If only I had paid attention sooner. If only I had listened to what my gut had been quietly trying to tell me for longer than I wanted to admit. But I am getting ahead of myself. You need to understand something first. You need to understand exactly how good Cedric was at being Cedric. Because the thing about a man like him, the thing that makes him so dangerous, is that he does not seem dangerous at all. Not yet. Let me tell you about the Thanksgiving before everything collapsed. Because I need you to understand what I was protecting when I refused to see what was right in front of me. We drove up to Rochelle's house in Concord that year, about 25 miles north of Charlotte, a brick colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac she had lived in for 30 years. Cedric's cousin Darren and his wife were there. Rochelle had cooked for 2 days straight. The house smelled like brown sugar and rosemary and something roasting low and slow, and Solange ran straight to the kitchen the moment we walked in because Rochelle always let her help with the rolls. Cedric and I sat on the back porch after dinner while everyone else was inside watching football. It was cold, maybe 48 degrees Fahrenheit, but neither of us went in. We just sat there under the string lights Rochelle kept up year-round, sharing a blanket, talking about nothing and everything the way you do when you are comfortable with someone down to your marrow. He talked about a client trip to Nashville he was excited about. I talked about a new audit methodology my firm was piloting. He held my hand the entire time. That was 6 months before his phone buzzed at 2 a.m. I tell you this because I need you to feel what I felt. I need you to understand why I kept finding explanations. Why I kept choosing to believe. When the person sitting next to you under the string lights feels that real, that present, that warm, You do not want to be the woman who blows up her family over a thick wallet and a bad feeling. So I waited and I watched. The second thing happened in early October. I was working late on a Thursday, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, and Cedric came downstairs to get water. His laptop was on the counter, open screen still lit. He was at the refrigerator with his back to me. And I was not snooping. I was not even looking, but the angle of my eyes landed on his screen for just a second. A banking app. An account I did not recognize. And a balance with enough zeros that my auditor brain flagged it before my wife brain could look away. He closed the laptop the moment he turned around. Smooth. Natural. Like he had done it 100 times.
Still working,
He said. Almost done, I said. He kissed the top of my head and went back upstairs. I sat there for a moment with my hands flat on the table. An account I did not recognize. A balance that did not match anything I knew about our finances. I told myself bonus. End of quarter bonus he had not mentioned yet. I told myself investment account, something he set up separately. Nothing unusual about that. I told myself a lot of things that night. But I opened a new tab and I started a document. Just a note. Date time what I saw. One line. I did not know yet why I was doing it. Just something in me, the auditor part, the part that lives below the surface, said, write it down. 2 weeks later came the dinner at Rochelle's house that I will never forget for the rest of my life. It was a Saturday evening, nothing special, just family dinner. Rochelle had made her short ribs. Cedric's cousin Darren was there again with his wife Patrice, and there were a couple of Rochelle's church friends at the table too. 8 of us total. Good food, easy conversation, the kind of dinner where everyone is a little louder than usual because the food is that good. And then Cedric started telling a story. It was about a mistake at work. A small one, he said, a rounding error on a client report, something that had to be resubmitted. Except the way he told it, it was not small. And the mistake was mine. He had called me at the office that afternoon about a personal tax document. I had read him a figure quickly while I was in the middle of something. And the figure had been correct, but he had written it down wrong. That was the actual story. But at Rochelle's dinner table, the story became about my carelessness, my distraction, my inability to slow down and be precise. He told it warmly. That was the thing. He was smiling the whole time, shaking his head with this fond, long-suffering affection, like a man gently roasting someone he loved. And he got to the punchline.
Good thing they keep her around for the paperwork.
And the table laughed. Darren laughed. Patrice laughed. Rochelle's church friends laughed. I sat completely still. My fork was in my hand and I could not remember picking it up. I felt my face do something careful and neutral that I had not told it to do. I felt my chest go tight in the specific way it goes tight when you are in a public place and something is wrong and you cannot react the way you actually want to react. Cedric looked at me across the table with that smile still on his face. Warm. Easy. You know, I'm just playing baby. He did not say it out loud. He did not need to. That was how he communicated in those moments, through a look that made you feel like you were the one being unreasonable for not laughing. I ate my short ribs. I complimented Rochelle's cooking. I helped clear the table. On the drive home, Cedric reached over and put his hand on my knee and said,
You good?
And I said, I'm fine. And he turned the radio up and sang along to something. And I watched the highway lights move across the windshield and thought very quietly, in a part of my mind I had not given much attention to yet. That was not a joke. That was something else. I just don't know what to call it yet. At home, after Solange was in bed, I added 3 more lines to the document. Then 2 nights later, Rochelle called me. Not Cedric, me. Which was not unusual. We talked regularly. But something in her opening was slightly off. A half beat too casual. She asked how I was doing, how work was going, was I getting enough sleep? I answered everything. And then she said almost gently, Renata, baby, you know you can slow down, right? Cedric mentioned you have been taking on a lot lately. He worries about you. I thanked her for saying so. I told her I was fine. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Cedric had not mentioned to me that he was worried about me. He had apparently mentioned it to his mother, and his mother had called me within 48 hours of that dinner to deliver a message dressed up as concern. I added one more line to the document. Then I heard him on the stairs coming up to bed, whistling something low and easy. And I closed the laptop, turned off my lamp, and lay in the dark next to the man I had built my life around, listening to him fall asleep in under 4 minutes the way he always did. And I thought, something is wrong, and I am the only one who knows it. But the worst was not yet anywhere close to arriving. The receipt fell out of his jacket pocket on a Monday morning. I was doing laundry. Completely ordinary Monday. Solange had already left for school. Cedric had already left for work. I had an 8:30 call in 40 minutes, and I was moving through the house on autopilot. I picked up his jacket from the back of the bedroom chair where he always dropped it, checked the pockets the way I always did before putting anything in the wash, and a folded piece of paper fell onto the floor. I picked it up. The Ballantine Hotel, Charlotte, North Carolina, 2 nights, a king suite. Checked in on a Friday, checked out on a Sunday. 6 weeks ago. The same weekend, Cedric had told me he was in Raleigh for a regional operations conference. I stood there in my bedroom with that receipt in my hand for what felt like a very long time. The washer was running. The morning light was coming through the curtains. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 30 seconds ago, and absolutely nothing was the same. My legs took me to the edge of the bed, and I sat down. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I did not cry. What happened was more like a physical short circuit. My hands went cold. My chest did that thing where it tightens so completely you have to consciously remind yourself to inhale. The room did not spin. It just went very still the way a room goes still right before something breaks. I photographed the receipt with my phone. I folded it back exactly as I had found it and put it back in the jacket pocket. I put the jacket in the wash. I got on my 8:30 call, and I did not miss a single number. That evening, I confronted him. I waited until Solange was in her room doing homework. I set the phone on the kitchen counter with the photograph pulled up, and I slid it across to him without saying a word. Cedric looked at the screen. He looked at it for exactly the right amount of time, not too fast, not too slow. Then he looked up at me with an expression I can only describe as patient. The expression of a man who has been mildly inconvenienced by a misunderstanding.
That's from before the Raleigh trip. There was a site visit in Charlotte the week before. Client wanted a meeting downtown. I stayed over rather than driving back and forth. I told you about this.
You didn't tell me about this, I said.
Renata.
He said my name the way you say a name when you are trying to be gentle with someone who is not being rational.
I did. You were in the middle of a deadline. You probably don't remember.
I stood there, and I felt something I had not expected to feel: doubt. Not about him, about myself. About my own memory. About whether I had been so consumed by work that I had stopped actually listening when he talked. That is the thing about gaslighting that nobody tells you. It does not feel like someone lying to you. It feels like discovering that your own mind might be unreliable. Those are 2 completely different kinds of fear. There were also 3 large cash withdrawals from our joint account. I said, in the last 2 months. I need to understand what those were for. And that is when his face changed. Not dramatically, just slightly. A cooling. A controlled stillness that I had never noticed before but would never stop noticing after.
The reason I can't talk to you about money, he said very evenly, is because every time I do, you get hysterical. You're not stable right now, Renata. I mean that with love. I genuinely worry about you. I think you need to talk to someone.
Hysterical. I had not raised my voice. I had not cried. I had slid a photograph across a counter and asked a question, and the word he chose was hysterical. I did not respond. I took my phone back and I went upstairs. That was week 1. Week 2 arrived with a calendar notification on my phone that I had not created. A doctor's appointment. Dr. Elaine Sutherland, our family physician, the following Thursday at 11 in the morning. I stared at the notification. I had not scheduled this. I went to Cedric and I asked him quietly if he had added this to my calendar. He looked up from his phone with an expression of pure, gentle concern.
I made you an appointment. Baby, you've been forgetting things. You snapped at Solange twice last week. I think you've been running on empty for months, and you won't admit it to yourself. I just want you to be okay.
He said it in front of Solange. She was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and she looked up at me with those big eyes and said,
Mom, are you okay? Dad said you've been really tired.
I looked at my 12-year-old daughter looking at me with worry on her face, worry that her father had planted there, and I felt something move through me that I do not have a clean word for. It was grief and fury, and a cold, dawning comprehension all at once. I smiled at Solange. I'm fine, baby. Finish your homework. I went to the appointment. Dr. Sutherland was kind professional, asked routine questions. I answered them all calmly and honestly. She found nothing concerning. But the appointment existed now. It was on my medical record. A wellness check initiated by my husband documented in a file. I understood what that was for. Week 3. I came home early on a Wednesday and heard Cedric's voice in the hallway. He was on the phone, I thought, or talking to Solange. I stood in the entryway and listened. He was talking to Solange. She was sitting on the bottom stair, and he was crouched in front of her, voice low and warm, like a father having a gentle, important conversation with his child.
Hey, baby. Mommy's been really tired and stressed lately. You know how sometimes grown-ups carry a lot, and it makes them a little forgetful, a little short. That's what's going on with Mom right now. So I just need you to be extra patient with her, okay? Extra sweet. She needs our grace right now.
Okay, Dad. I will.
That's my girl.
I stood in the entryway and I did not make a sound. I set my bag down without a noise. I breathed. He had taken my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, who loved me completely and without question, and turned her into a participant in his narrative. She did not know she was doing it. That was the cruelty of it. She thought she was helping. For the next week, every time she looked at me with that careful, watchful concern and asked Mom, "Are you okay?" she was, without knowing it, reflecting back to me the story Cedric was writing about who I was. A woman who was not stable. A woman who was tired and forgetful and needed grace. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, opened my laptop, and added everything to the document. Every detail. Dates, times, exact words. The document was 11 pages now. Then I went back downstairs, and I made dinner, and I asked Cedric about his day, and I listened to him talk, and I nodded in the right places. And the next morning I went to work, and I sat down across from my colleague, Philip Tran, and I slid a folder of printed financial documents across his desk, and I said quietly, "I need you to look at something." Off the record. "Tell me what you see." Philip looked at the first page, then the second. Then he looked up at me. "Ren Dolly," he said slowly, "where did you get these?" "My house," I said. "What do you see?" He looked back down at the papers. His jaw tightened slightly. "I see a shell company," he said, "and I see your home address." The shell company was registered under the name GF Logistics Solutions LLC. GF. 2 letters. I stared at them on the printout Philip had highlighted in yellow, and I turned them over in my mind the way you turn over a stone you are not sure you want to look under. Philip had pulled the state business registry records in about 4 minutes flat. The registered agent was a woman named Giselle Fontaine. The registered address was 941 Selwyn Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina. My house, a company I had never heard of, registered to a woman I had never heard of with my home address on the paperwork. And Philip, careful, methodical. Philip, who had been auditing corporate accounts for 16 years, sat across from me with his hands flat on the desk and said, "Renata, this has asset concealment written all over it. Someone is moving money through this entity and using your property as cover. You need an attorney. Today." I thanked him. I told him I would handle it. I took the folder back, went to the bathroom at the end of the hall, ran cold water over my wrists for 30 seconds, and went back to my desk. I did not call Nadine that day. Not yet. I needed to know more before I said the words out loud. Saying the words out loud would make them real in a way I was not ready for. So I kept working. I kept adding to the document. I kept moving. That was the last week of October, and that Friday night is when it happened. Cedric and I had been cordial all week. That is the only word for it. Not cold, not warm cordial. The kind of careful surface-level pleasantness that settles over a marriage when both people are managing something they are not yet naming. We ate dinner together. We helped Solange with her homework. We watched television. We went to bed. He fell asleep in under 4 minutes the way he always did. I lay next to him in the dark and I watched the ceiling and I listened to him breathe. I thought about GF Logistics Solutions LLC and a king suite at the Ballantine. And 3 cash withdrawals I still could not account for. At 2 a.m, his phone buzzed. It was on the nightstand on his side face-up screen lit. He did not stir. The notification sat there for 5 seconds before the screen went dark again. But 5 seconds was enough. I had seen 2 things. A name I did not recognize, W. Cross, and 4 words below it in the preview line. It's done. Transfer confirmed. I did not move. I lay completely still and I breathed and I counted to 20 and I listened to make sure Cedric's breathing had not changed. It had not. He was still asleep. Then I reached across him, slowly picked up my own phone from my nightstand and photographed his screen in the dark. The notification was gone, but the timestamp was there. 2:14 in the morning. Cross. It's done. Transfer confirmed. I set my phone back down. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I lay there and I thought about those 4 words. I thought about Philip saying asset concealment. I thought about Cedric's face when he said, "You're not stable, Renata." And I thought about Solange's worried eyes asking,
Mama, you okay?
and something inside me, something that had been bending and bending under the weight of all of it, went very quiet. Not broken quiet, decided quiet. Morning came. Cedric woke up stretched, kissed me on the forehead, went downstairs to make coffee. Normal. Completely normal. He called up to Solange about her soccer cleats. He asked me if we needed anything from the grocery store. He loaded the dishwasher. I watched him move through our kitchen like a man with nothing on his conscience. And I thought, he is very good at this. 2 days later, I sat across from Philip again and asked him to run one more search. Cross. Charlotte, North Carolina. Financial services. Philip came back to me in 20 minutes. Wendell Cross CPA. Certified public accountant with a practice in the South End neighborhood, about 3 miles from our house. Specializing in, according to his firm's website, business formation and asset structuring. Asset structuring. I wrote the address down. I called the office that afternoon from my car parked 3 blocks from our house with the windows up. A woman answered. I gave my name, Renata Mercer, and asked to speak with Mr. Cross about a business matter. There was a pause on the line. Not a long one. Maybe 3 seconds. But I am a woman who notices pauses. 1 moment, please, she said. Another pause. Longer. Then a man's voice. Careful. Measured. The voice of someone choosing words with precision.
Mrs. Mercer, I think there may be some things you should be aware of.
We met 2 days later. But before I tell you about that meeting, I need to tell you about what happened on the Tuesday in between. Because Cedric did not slow down. If anything, he accelerated. And the worst thing he did that week, he did in front of our daughter. We were in the kitchen after dinner. Solange was still at the table finishing her juice. I had said something light, something about the weekend. About maybe taking Solange to the botanical gardens on Saturday. A normal comment. A mother planning a Saturday. And Cedric looked at me across the kitchen island with a small smile, the kind that does not reach anywhere near the eyes.
Solange, honey, Mommy works so hard because nobody would ever pay for anything else she has to offer.
He said it the way you say something you intend to be a joke. Light. Throwaway. He was already turning toward the refrigerator when he finished the sentence. Solange looked at me. She was 12 years old and she did not fully understand what had just been said. But she understood enough. She understood that something had just happened. Her eyes went uncertain the way children's eyes go when the adults in the room do something that does not compute. I stood at the kitchen sink with my hands wrapped around a dish towel. I looked at my daughter's uncertain face, and I felt something happen in my chest that I do not have clean language for. It was not sadness. It was not anger. It was something older and quieter and more absolute than either of those things. He had just said that to me, in front of our child, as a joke. I smiled at Solange. The botanical gardens are going to be beautiful this weekend, baby. Go finish your homework. She slid off her chair and went upstairs. Cedric poured himself a glass of water and checked his phone. I finished the dishes. That night, after Solange was asleep, I sat at my desk. I did not add to the document. I just read back through everything I had written. Every date, every detail, every line, 14 pages now. And then on the Thursday morning of that week, I arrived at work to find a message waiting for me from the front desk. My supervisor, Gregory Caldwell, wanted to see me. His door was closed when I got there, which was unusual. He opened it himself when I knocked, gestured me in, and closed it again behind me. He sat down. He looked at me with the careful expression of a man who does not want to be having a particular conversation. "Renata," he said, "I received a call yesterday from a woman who identified herself as your mother-in-law. She expressed serious concern about your emotional state. She said you have been experiencing a mental health crisis and that she was worried about your capacity to, her words, perform at a high level right now." The room went very still. "I want to be clear," Gregory said carefully, "that this has no bearing on your standing here. Your work has been exceptional as always, but I am required to document the call. And I wanted you to hear it from me directly." I sat across from my supervisor in the office I had worked in for 6 years. I looked at the documented concern on his face, and I understood with total crystalline clarity what Rochelle had done. She had called my workplace. She had used the language of mental health crisis capacity, emotional state, to plant a seed of doubt about my professional reliability, to build in advance a record that could be used to undermine me. She had not been lured into this by her son. She had picked up the phone herself and dialed. I thanked Gregory for telling me. I told him I was fine. I walked back to my desk. I sat down. I opened my laptop, and I typed one line at the bottom of the document. They are working together. Wendell Cross had a small office on Tremont Avenue in South End, the kind of neighborhood that used to be warehouses and had slowly become coffee shops and consulting firms. His building was a converted brick space second floor with tall windows and exposed ductwork, and the particular quiet of a place where serious things get discussed in low voices. I arrived 8 minutes early. I sat in my car and I looked at the entrance, and I thought about the 14 pages on my laptop and the photograph of a text message I had taken in the dark at 2 a.m, and I thought, whatever he tells me in there, I am ready for it. I was not ready for it. Wendell Cross was 61 years old, a compact man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the careful, deliberate manner of someone who had spent 4 decades choosing his words precisely because the wrong ones had legal consequences. He shook my hand. He offered me coffee. I declined. We sat down on opposite sides of a plain wooden desk. He folded his hands and looked at me.
"Mrs. Mercer,"
he said,
"I am going to tell you some things that are going to be difficult to hear. And I want to preface them by saying that my reason for telling you is not entirely altruistic. I am in a complicated position. And I believe that what is good for you in this situation is also, at this point, what is good for me."
I appreciated the honesty. I told him to go ahead. He had been hired by Cedric 10 months ago. That was the first thing. 10 months ago, 4 months before I had noticed the thick wallet, 5 months before the dinner at Rochelle's, 6 months before the receipt fell out of the jacket pocket. While I was sitting on back porches under string lights holding my husband's hand, he had already been in this office building a structure designed to leave me with nothing. The plan as Wendell laid it out was methodical. Cedric intended to file for divorce. Before doing so, he needed to move as much of the marital assets as possible into a vehicle that would not be immediately visible to a family court. GF Logistics Solutions LLC was that vehicle. The company had no actual operations. It existed purely as a financial container. Assets transferred into it would on paper belong to the business, not to Cedric personally, not to the marriage. The registered agent was Giselle Fontaine. "Tell me about her," I said. Wendell took his glasses off his forehead and set them on the desk.
Miss Fontaine is a loan officer at a private bank in South Park.
He said.
She and your husband have been in a personal relationship for approximately 14 months. She was aware of his marital status. She agreed to serve as registered agent for the LLC in exchange for...
He paused, chose the next word carefully.
Certain assurances about her financial future once the divorce was finalized.
She knew. She had always known. I sat with that for a moment. There would be no version of this where Giselle Fontaine was a naive woman who had been deceived. She was a participant, a willing one. She had put her name on a document attached to my home address, and she had done it with full knowledge of what it was for. What changed? I asked. Why are you telling me this now? Wendell was quiet for a moment.
Because your husband has not paid the remaining balance of my fee,
he said.
60% was paid up front. The remaining 40% was due upon completion of the final transfer. The transfer completed 3 nights ago.
He paused.
As of this morning, my calls are going to voicemail.
It's done. Transfer confirmed. 2:14 in the morning. The text I had photographed in the dark. He used you, I said.
Yes.
Wendell said. There was no particular emotion in his voice. Just a flat professional acknowledgement of a fact he had spent several days arriving at.
And I am now in a position where I facilitated a transaction that, if examined closely, could create significant problems for my license. I would prefer those problems not to materialize.
I looked at him across the plain wooden desk, and I understood the geometry of the situation completely. He had documentation. Every communication, every instruction, every transfer record, the paper trail of Cedric's plan existed in this office in meticulous detail, because Wendell Cross was a man who documented everything, which was both why Cedric had hired him and why Cedric's decision not to pay him was the single most catastrophic mistake of this entire scheme. I want copies of everything, I said.
I assumed you would,
he said.
I had them prepared before you arrived.
He slid a large envelope across the desk. I did not open it. I put it in my bag and I stood up and I shook his hand and I walked back down the stairs and out onto Tremont Avenue and I stood on the sidewalk in the November air and I looked at the street. 14 months. Giselle had been in this for 14 months. The LLC had been 10 months in construction. The cash withdrawals, the hotel, the manufactured narrative about my mental instability, the call to my workplace, every piece of it had been deliberate, sequential, timed. I thought about that Thanksgiving porch, the string lights, his hand holding mine. The truth did not just hurt. It gutted me, like someone had reached inside my chest and removed everything I had used to make sense of my own life and left the cavity open. 11 years. So lange. The magnolia tree on Selwyn Avenue. The Thai restaurant on the last Friday of every month. All of it had existed alongside this. All of it had been in some way I was still struggling to fully process a backdrop. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock. Then I started the engine. And here is what happened inside me on that drive home, and I want to describe it carefully because it matters. The grief was real. I am not going to tell you I skipped past it or powered through it or left it behind on Tremont Avenue. It was there. It was enormous. The kind of grief that does not announce itself loudly, but settles into every part of you like cold water, finding every crack. But underneath it, running parallel to it, not replacing it, something else was happening. Something quiet and precise, and if I am being completely honest, something that felt almost like recognition. Because I had been here before. Not in this situation, not in this specific devastating situation, but in this mode. This exact cognitive state. I had sat across from spreadsheets that told one story on the surface and an entirely different story underneath, and I had felt this exact quality of clarity. This particular sharpening of focus, this sense of all the noise falling away and leaving only what was real and what could be proven. I knew how to do this. I had been doing this for 14 years. I pulled into our driveway on Selwyn Avenue and I sat there looking at the house, the magnolia tree, the front windows with the warm light coming through, Solange's soccer bag visible through the garage window, I thought about Cedric inside, making dinner maybe, or watching television, living his life. I thought about Joelle Fontaine in her office in South Park, assuming the transfer had completed and the plan was in motion. I thought about Rochelle dialing my supervisor's number, and something inside me went completely still. Not the still of defeat, not the still of a woman who has run out of options, the still of a woman who has just realized she is not the one who should be afraid. I got out of the car. I went inside. I kissed Solange on top of her head. I asked Cedric how his day was. I set my bag with the envelope from Wendell Cross inside on the shelf in my home office, behind a stack of files, and I closed the door. That night, after the house was quiet, I called Nadine. Not the call of a woman falling apart. The call of a woman who has decided.
Ren.
Nadine answered on the second ring. She always answers on the second ring when it is late, and it is me. I do not know if she has ever told me that or if I just know it the way you know certain things about the people who have been in your life long enough to become part of its architecture. One ring to register that it is me. Second ring to pick up. Never makes me wait for 3. Not a question. Just my name the way she says it when she already knows something is wrong. Nadine, I said, I need you. Not as my friend, as my attorney. A pause. Short.
I'll be there in 20 minutes.
She was there in 17. I opened the door before she knocked because I had been watching the street from the front window. She came in. She looked at my face. She looked at the envelope on the kitchen table. She looked back at my face. She did not hug me. She did not say, "Oh, honey," or "I'm so sorry," or any of the things people say when they are trying to manage someone else's pain. She pulled out a chair, sat down, opened her bag, and took out a legal pad. That is why I have loved Nadine Okafor for 20 years.
Tell me everything. From the beginning, leave nothing out.
I told her everything. It took a long time. She did not interrupt. She wrote on the legal pad in her clean, precise handwriting, and she asked clarifying questions at exactly the right moments. Not to redirect me, to sharpen what I was saying into something that could be used. Dates, exact amounts, names, the sequence of events, Wendell Cross and the envelope, the LLC, Joelle Fontaine, Rochelle's call to Gregory Caldwell. When I finished, Nadine set her pen down and looked at me across the kitchen table.
How long have you been documenting? She asked.
A while, I said. She looked at me for a moment, a specific kind of look. The look of a woman who has known me for 20 years and is doing a rapid recalculation.
How long is a while, Renata?
I looked back at her. I did not answer the question directly. I just held her gaze. She picked her pen back up.
Okay,
she said quietly, and I could see it in her face, the understanding beginning to form. The shape of something she was not yet asking out loud.
Okay, then let's talk about what we do with what you have.
What we had was by any professional measure significant. Wendell Cross's documentation gave us the blueprint of the scheme, the instructions Cedric had given, the transfer records, the timeline. My own records gave us the behavioral pattern, the gaslighting, the manufactured medical appointment, the call to my workplace, the public humiliations. Philip's initial findings gave us independent corroboration of the LLC's suspicious structure. Nadine went through the envelope from Wendell with the focus of a surgeon, page by page. She made notes. She flagged things. She asked me twice to confirm dates against my own documentation. At one point, she sat back, tapped her pen against the legal pad, and said almost to herself,
He really thought he was the smartest person in this.
He really did, I said.
That's always the mistake,
she said, and she went back to the papers. By midnight, we had the outline of a strategy. Nadine would file a motion to freeze marital assets pending divorce proceedings. Standard procedure. But with Wendell's documentation attached, it would hit Cedric's legal team like a wall. She would subpoena the LLC records through proper channels, which would force Joelle Fontaine into the legal structure of the case, whether she wanted to be there or not. And I would continue building the financial audit trail. Because what I could produce in that capacity, Nadine said, would be unlike anything Cedric's attorney had prepared for.
He's going to expect a grieving wife who's off balance. He's been engineering that perception for months. He's going to walk into that courtroom thinking he's walking in against someone he's already defeated.
I know, I said.
You're going to let him keep thinking that.
I know, I said again. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she almost smiled. Almost. The way Nadine almost smiles when something is serious, but also underneath the serious clarifying.
All right, let's build this thing.
She left at 1 in the morning. I walked her to the door. I watched her taillights disappear down Selwyn Avenue. Then I stood in my front hallway in the quiet of my house, and I breathed. Somewhere upstairs, Cedric was asleep. In under 4 minutes, the way he always was. Somewhere upstairs, Solange was asleep in her room with the glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling that we had put up together when she was 7 years old. She had been so serious about the placement, making me hold her up so she could reach, telling me exactly where each one had to go. I stood in the hallway and I looked at the stairs, and I thought, she is why I do not get to fall apart. She is why every single move from here has to be right. I went to my home office. I sat down. I opened my laptop. I opened the document 15 pages now. I read through everything I had written, every entry, every date, every exact word. And then I opened a new document, a clean one. And I began to build the audit trail the way I would build it for any client. Methodical, sourced, cross-referenced, airtight, not a journal, not a record of my feelings. A financial forensic document that could stand up in a courtroom in front of a judge who had seen everything and could not be moved by anything except evidence. I worked until 4 in the morning. Then I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. I got into bed next to Cedric. I lay there listening to him breathe. The next morning, he made pancakes. Saturday tradition. He had been making pancakes on Saturday mornings since Solange was 4 years old. She sat at the counter on her stool. He flipped them with that easy showmanship he had, making her laugh when he tossed one too high. He brought me a plate without being asked, the way he always did, with the butter already melted, and the syrup on the side because he knew I liked it on the side. I said thank you. I ate my pancakes. I asked him about the Panthers game that afternoon. He talked for 10 minutes about the Panthers. I listened. I nodded. I refilled my coffee. Inside, behind my eyes, I was somewhere else entirely. I was looking at numbers. I was tracing transfers. I was building something he could not see and had not been given any reason to anticipate. Let him enjoy his pancakes, I thought. Let him feel easy and certain and in control. Every day he feels that way is a day I am working. There is a particular kind of power in being underestimated by someone who is depending on your weakness. I had spent months feeling destabilized by Cedric's campaign to make me doubt myself. But sitting at that kitchen counter watching him flip pancakes for our daughter, I understood something that shifted everything. He had never once considered that I might be better at this than he was. He audited the wrong woman. I smiled at him across the kitchen. He smiled back, warm and easy and completely unsuspecting. I drank my coffee. 4 weeks. That is how long I had between that Saturday morning with the pancakes and the date of the first hearing. 4 weeks during which Cedric Lamont Mercer walked through our house, slept in our bed, ate at our table, and believed with what I can only describe as breathtaking confidence that he had already won. I want to tell you what those 4 weeks looked like from the inside, because the outside was almost entirely unremarkable. I went to work. I helped Solange with her homework. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week the way I always had. I attended a parent-teacher conference at Solange's school and sat next to Cedric and nodded at the right times and thanked her teacher for the update. On 2 Sundays, I drove to Rochelle's house for dinner and sat at her table and ate her food and smiled at her stories and thought about the phone call she had made to Gregory Caldwell and felt nothing on my face. Nothing. Not a flicker. I'd always been good at stillness in high-pressure situations. 14 years of presenting audit findings to hostile CFOs and defensive boards will do that for you. But this was a different kind of stillness. This was not professional composure. This was something colder and more deliberate. This was a woman who had made a decision and was executing it. Every evening after Solange was in bed and Cedric was watching television downstairs, I went to my home office, closed the door, and worked. The audit trail grew. 40 pages, 53 pages, 67 pages, each entry cross-referenced, each figure sourced, each transfer traced to its origin and its destination. Nadine reviewed sections as I completed them, sent back notes in the margins, asked for additional sourcing on 2 transfers that she wanted bulletproof. Philip ran 2 more searches for me off the record from his personal laptop at home. He did not ask questions beyond what was necessary. He had known me long enough to understand that when I was this quiet about something, the something was significant. The picture that emerged across those 82 pages was comprehensive and unambiguous. 10 months of systematic asset movement, $43,000 transferred through the LLC in 7 separate transactions, each structured to fall below the reporting threshold. Classic layering technique, the kind you see in corporate fraud cases, not in the finances of a marriage. Cedric had learned just enough about asset concealment to execute a plan. He had not learned enough to execute it against someone who had spent 14 years finding exactly these patterns for a living. The irony was not lost on me. Nadine filed the asset freeze motion on a Tuesday. Cedric's attorney, a man named Garrett Hollis, who had a reputation for being aggressive in high-asset divorces, filed a counter motion 2 days later. The legal machinery began moving. Cedric came home that Tuesday evening with a slightly harder edge to his composure, a small tightening around his eyes that told me Garrett Hollis had called him, with news he had not been expecting. He said nothing to me about it directly. Neither did I. We had dinner. He helped Solange with her science project. We went to bed. But I noticed the edge, and I filed it. The following weekend, Cedric went to a birthday party for an old college friend named Reginald, a gathering of men I had known peripherally for years. I did not attend. I stayed home with Solange. We made brownies. We watched a movie. And it was the most peaceful evening I had spent in months. The next morning, Nadine texted me a screenshot. One of the men at that party, a mutual acquaintance who had apparently decided his loyalty lay with me rather than Cedric, had sent her a message. At the party, Cedric had made a series of comments about the divorce. Casual, confident. The way of a man who is among friends and feels no need to measure his words.
She's going to get exactly what she put in. Which is not much. Garrett's going to make this quick. She doesn't even have independent counsel she can afford. Honestly, I feel bad for her. But she should have just signed when I gave her the chance.
I read those messages sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee in my hand. Solange was still asleep. The house was quiet. Outside, the magnolia tree was bare for winter, its branches clean and skeletal against a gray November sky. He felt bad for me. I set my phone down. I picked up my coffee. I looked at the magnolia tree for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop and added 3 more pages to the audit trail. The week before the hearing, Cedric's confidence reached a register I had not seen before. Not aggressive. Never openly aggressive. That was not his style. But expansive. Settled. The confidence of a man who has looked at the board and seen no moves his opponent can make. He was solicitous with Solange. Attentive with me. Almost magnanimous in the particular way of someone who feels they can afford to be generous because the outcome is already determined. He brought home flowers on a Wednesday. Grocery store flowers. Yellow tulips. The kind he used to bring in the early years of our marriage. He set them on the kitchen counter and said,
I know things are hard right now. I just want you to know I don't have bad feelings about you, Ren. I never did.
I put the tulips in a vase. I thanked him. I said that meant a lot. Then the night before the hearing at 9:47 in the evening, my phone lit up with a text notification. I looked at the screen. It was from Cedric's number, a message that had clearly been intended for Garrett Hollis. A message that Cedric had in the self-satisfied carelessness of a man who believed tomorrow was already decided, sent to the wrong contact.
She's an auditor. She counts numbers. I built a life. Let her audit that.
I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the desk. And then in the silence of my home office with the audit trail open on my laptop and 82 pages of documented evidence sitting in a folder beside me, I did something I had not done in a very long time. I laughed. Not loud, not long. Just a single quiet exhale of a laugh. The kind that comes not from humor, but from a recognition so complete it bypasses every other response. He had just sent me the closing argument of his own case. I forwarded the message to Nadine immediately. Her response came back in under a minute.
Oh, he did not. Save that. We're using it.
I closed my laptop at 10:30. I set out my clothes for the morning. The charcoal gray suit I wore when I was presenting major findings. The one that Gregory Caldwell once said made me look like someone who had already decided the outcome before walking in the room. I packed the folder with the 82 pages. I checked everything twice. Then I went upstairs and I looked in on Solange, sleeping with one arm flung over her pillow the way she had slept since she was a baby. I stood in her doorway for a moment in the dark, and I thought about everything I was doing this for. Not revenge, not anger, not even justice in the abstract. For her, for the version of her that deserved a mother who did not allow herself to be erased. I went to bed. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. I did not need it. I was already awake when it went off, waiting. The Mecklenburg County Courthouse on East 4th Street has a particular quality of light in the early morning. Cold and institutional, the kind of light that strips everything down to what it actually is. No flattery, no softening, just what is real and what can be proven. I arrived at 8:45. Nadine was already there in the hallway outside the courtroom, in her navy suit, with her briefcase open on a bench and her legal pad covered in handwriting. She looked up when she saw me. She took in the charcoal gray suit, the folder under my arm, and she gave me a single nod, the nod of a general whose army is ready. Cedric arrived at 9:05 with Garrett Hollis. Garrett Hollis was tall, silver-haired, expensive-looking in the specific way of attorneys who charge by the fraction of an hour. He carried himself with the practiced authority of a man who won cases regularly and expected this to be no different. Cedric walked beside him with his hands in his pockets. His shoulders relaxed, his chin at the particular angle of a man who has decided the outcome before the proceeding begins. He was wearing the charcoal suit, the good one. The one I had bought him for his 40th birthday. They took their seats at the table across the aisle. Garrett opened his briefcase with a precise click. Cedric arranged his water glass. He glanced over at our table, at Nadine's organized chaos of papers, at my folder, at me.
You should have just signed Renata. Now everyone's going to see how out of your depth you really are.
He leaned forward slightly in his chair and said it low enough that only I could hear. His voice was warm with the particular warmth of someone who believes they are being magnanimous in the moment of victory. He straightened up, adjusted his tie, turned back toward the front of the room. I looked at the table in front of me. I looked at the folder with 82 pages inside it. I looked at my own hands flat and completely still on the surface of the table. I said nothing. I did not look at him again. 30 seconds later, the bailiff called the room to order.
The Honorable Judge Carolyn Reeves presided.
60 years old, natural silver locks, the kind of courtroom demeanor that communicates clearly and immediately that theater will not be tolerated here. She had been on the family court bench for 19 years. She had heard everything. She was not interested in anything she had already heard. Garrett Hollis opened. He was polished and efficient. He presented Cedric as the primary architect of the marriage's financial stability, a driven professional whose business development career had provided the structural foundation upon which the household had been built. He characterized my income as supplementary. He described my documentation of the LLC as the product of, in his exact words, an emotionally destabilized spouse grasping for leverage in a contentious separation. Emotionally destabilized. There was Rochelle's groundwork showing up exactly where Cedric had planted it. Garrett concluded with a flourish. He was confident. He had done this before. He sat down and clicked his pen once. the click of a man who considers the matter essentially settled. Cedric allowed himself a small smile. He looked at his attorney. They exchanged a brief glance, the glance of two people who have agreed in advance that this would be straightforward. Then Nadine stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform. She simply stood at the table with her legal pad and looked at Judge Reeves.
Your Honor, my client would like to submit Exhibit A.
She lifted the folder, 82 pages, tabbed and indexed, cross-referenced, every figure sourced, every transfer traced. She had copies for the judge, copies for Garrett Hollis, copies for the record. She placed them with the care of someone who has built something that does not need to be announced loudly because it speaks entirely for itself.
My client is a senior financial auditor with 14 years of professional experience. She began documenting financial irregularities in this marriage 10 months ago. The LLC in question, GF Logistics Solutions, was identified by my client as a fraudulent asset concealment vehicle. The 2 a.m. text message that first drew her attention was not a discovery. It was confirmation of what she already knew.
She paused. Let that settle.
My client has been auditing this marriage, Your Honor, since January.
Judge Reeves looked down at the first page of the exhibit, then the second. Then she looked up at Garrett Hollis, then at Cedric. I watched Cedric's face. I had been waiting for this moment for 10 months. The color left his face first. Not gradually, quickly. The way color leaves when the body understands something before the mind has finished processing it. That warm, easy complexion went gray under the courtroom lights. Gray and suddenly unfamiliar. Like a mask that had slipped to reveal something underneath that had never been meant to be seen. His hands were next. He had them on the table in front of him. I watched them begin to tremble, a fine involuntary trembling. He tried once to control it by pressing his palms flat. He could not. The papers in front of him shifted slightly with the movement. He did not pick them up. Then the sweat, faint at his hairline, catching the flat institutional light of the courtroom. He reached up once and touched his forehead, a gesture so automatic he did not seem to know he was making it. And his voice when Garrett Hollis leaned toward him and whispered something urgent. Cedric tried to respond. It came out in pieces, halved, cracked down the middle like something that had been under too much pressure for too long. His knees, when he shifted in his chair, did not hold him the way they had this morning. He gripped the edge of the table. I looked at him for exactly as long as it took to see all of that. Then I looked away.
Mrs. Mercer, counsel has indicated that you began this documentation 10 months prior to filing. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor, I said. The judge looked at the exhibit again. Then she looked at Cedric.
I'm going to read something into the record. This is a text message submitted as Exhibit C sent from the respondent's phone the evening prior to this hearing.
She put on her reading glasses.
She's an auditor. She counts numbers. I built a life. Let her audit that.
She removed her glasses.
Mrs. Mercer, would you like to respond to that statement?
The courtroom was completely silent. I looked at Judge Reeves. Then just once I looked at Cedric, at the gray face, the trembling hands, the cracked voice, the man who had sat across from me at dinner for 11 years and believed I would never think to look at him the way I looked at everything else. I already did, Your Honor, 10 months ago. The sound that moved through the courtroom was not loud. It was just a breath, a collective exhale. The sound a room makes when something that has been building finally arrives. What followed was not fast, but it was complete. Judge Reeves ordered an immediate review of the LLC structure. She flagged the case for potential referral to the district attorney's office for investigation of fraudulent asset concealment. The freeze on marital assets was upheld. Giselle Fontaine would be required to appear in subsequent proceedings. Wendell Cross's documentation was entered into the record in its entirety. Garrett Hollis asked twice for a recess. Judge Reeves denied both requests. In the hallway afterward, while Nadine spoke with the clerk, Cedric appeared at my shoulder. I heard him before I saw him. The particular cadence of his footsteps. 11 years familiar, now meaning something entirely different.
Renata, please. There has to be something we can figure out. We can talk to Garrett. We can restructure the USL.
I turned to look at him. He was still wearing the charcoal suit I had bought him for his 40th birthday. He looked smaller in it than he had this morning. "You're not sorry, Cedric," I said quietly. Without heat, "You're sorry I was better at this than you expected." He opened his mouth. Nothing came. I picked up my bag. I walked back to where Nadine was standing. I did not look back. Behind me, I heard Garrett Hollis say something to Cedric in a low, controlled voice. I heard Cedric exhale, a long, ragged sound. The sound of a man watching 10 months of careful construction come apart in a single morning. Giselle had already left the building. She had been in the gallery. The moment Judge Reeves began reading from Exhibit A, she had stood up, gathered her coat, and walked out without looking at Cedric once. I know because Nadine told me later. I had not been watching the gallery. I had been watching the judge. Rochelle sat in the back row until the very end. I did not look at her either. I did not need to. I already knew what her face would show. And I had decided that her expression was no longer something I needed to read. Nadine put her hand briefly on my arm as we walked toward the exit. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Outside on East 4th Street, the November air hit my face. I stopped for a moment on the courthouse steps. I breathed. Cold air. Real air. The kind of morning that does not ask anything of you except to be present in it. For the first time in 11 years, I had walked out of a room without waiting for his permission. 4 months later, on a Saturday morning in March, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in Noda and watched the neighborhood wake up. Noda, North Davidson. The Arts District, about 4 miles northeast of Myers Park. I had driven through it a dozen times over the years without ever stopping, always on the way to somewhere else. Now I lived here, in a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a converted building. Tall windows, hardwood floors, a balcony that faced east, which meant the morning light came in generous and unhurried, and landed on everything like it had decided to stay. I had found the apartment myself, toured it on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 client calls, a detail that did not escape me, the echo of it, the way certain gestures repeat across the chapters of a life. I signed the lease 3 days later. I painted Solange's room a deep, warm terracotta that she had chosen from a sample strip at the hardware store, holding it up to the light and announcing with absolute certainty that this was the one. She was right. It was the one. Her room had a window seat. She had claimed it within 4 minutes of our first walkthrough, sitting in it with her knees pulled up, looking out at the courtyard below with an expression of complete satisfaction. Something in my chest that had been clenched for a very long time simply let go. We ate breakfast on the balcony every morning that the weather allowed, Solange and I, with our plates, our orange juice, and whatever she was currently obsessed with discussing, her soccer team, a book she was reading, a complicated social situation at school that required detailed analysis. She talked. I listened. The morning light came in from the east. It was the simplest thing in the world, and it was everything. I want to tell you what became of the people in this story, because you have earned that. You have been with me through all of it. Cedric, the district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into the LLC structure in January, 2 months after the hearing. As of the time I am telling you this, that investigation is ongoing. He is living in a 1-bedroom apartment in University City, across town. I know this not because I am keeping track of him, but because Solange told me after a visitation weekend, the way children report information without attaching drama to it. He drives a different car now. The business development director title that had appeared on his LinkedIn profile for 3 years was quietly removed sometime in December. I noticed, because I am an auditor, and I notice things. I did not feel satisfaction about it exactly. I felt something more like the flat recognition of a fact. Giselle Fontaine was subpoenaed in January. Her attorney negotiated a cooperation agreement. She provided testimony about her role in the LLC structure, in exchange for reduced exposure. I do not know the details beyond what Nadine has told me, which is that her cooperation was thorough, and that it was not offered out of conscience, but out of self-preservation. I hold no particular feeling about Giselle Fontaine. She made her choices. She is living inside them now.
Wendell Cross retained his CPA license.
As Nadine had anticipated, in exchange for his full cooperation and documentation,
He sent me a brief formal note in December. I hope things are going well for you, Mrs. Mercer. I'm sorry for my part in this.
I read it once and put it in a drawer. It was not absolution, but it was something. Rochelle, this one is harder to tell you about because the feelings are harder and more layered. I had to sit with them for months before I understood what I wanted to say. She called me in February. I let it go to voicemail twice. The third time I picked up, she cried. She said she was sorry. She said she had believed Cedric's version of things, that I was unstable, that the marriage had broken down because of my emotional unavailability, that she was protecting her son. She said she had not understood until the hearing the full scope of what he had done. She said calling my workplace was something she had thought about every day since. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When she finished, I said, Rochelle, I believe that you are sorry, and I accept your apology, but I need you to understand something. I'm not the same woman who used to sit at your table and absorb things quietly. That woman was trying to hold something together that was already gone. I am not her anymore, and any relationship we have going forward will be built on that understanding. She was quiet for a long moment. I understand, she said. We have spoken twice since then, carefully, with the particular care of two people navigating new terrain without a map. I do not know what that becomes. I am not in a hurry to decide. And me, my life. In January, I was promoted to Director of Audit at Caldwell & Associates. Gregory Caldwell called me into his office. Closed the door. The same way he had closed it when he told me about Rochelle's call months earlier. He told me the firm had been watching my trajectory for years, that the position had been discussed before any of the personal circumstances of the past year, and that he wanted me to know the decision was entirely professional. I thanked him. I meant it. I went back to my desk. I sat for a moment with my hands flat on the surface, and I thought about the woman who had sat at that same desk in the middle of everything, building 82 pages of documentation in the evenings, showing up every morning without flinching. I was proud of her. I am proud of her. Nadine and I have breakfast on North Davidson Street most Saturday mornings. We sit at the window table, drink coffee, talk about everything and nothing, the way we have since we were 18 years old. Last month, she looked at me across the table and said,
You know what I keep thinking about?
What?
That porch in Concord. You told me I was being paranoid.
I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that starts somewhere deep and comes out without asking permission. You were not being paranoid, I said.
No, she said. I was not.
We paid the check, walked out into the Saturday morning. The air smelled like coffee, cold pavement, and something green beginning to come up through the soil, the way things come up in March, quiet and inevitable. I have thought a lot about what I want to say to you, whoever you are, wherever you are watching this, whatever you are carrying. Here is what I know. There is a particular kind of loneliness in doubting your own mind, in looking at the facts in front of you, and choosing to believe the stories someone else is telling you. I lived in that loneliness for longer than I should have, not because I was weak, but because I loved someone. And love has a way of making the narrative you want to believe feel more real than the evidence you are standing in. I am not ashamed of that. I am also not going to do it again. What saved me was not dramatic courage. It was something quieter. The part of me trained for 14 years to look at what was real rather than what was presented. The part that wrote things down. The part that said, tell me what you see. The part that called Nadine not to cry, but to build. If you are in something right now that makes you feel like you are losing your mind, if someone is making you doubt your memory, your perceptions, your worth, I want you to hear this. Write it down. Date it. Source it. Keep the receipts, literal and otherwise, not out of anger, out of clarity, because clarity is the one thing they are trying to take from you, and it is the one thing that cannot be taken if you refuse to let it go. You are not imagining it. You are not unstable. You are not out of your depth. You just have not yet turned the auditor's eye on the right subject. My name is Renata Joelle Mercer. I am 37 years old. I am the Director of Audit at Caldwell & Associates in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am the mother of a 12-year-old girl who knows exactly where every glow-in-the-dark star on her ceiling belongs. And I am the woman who audited her own life and discovered that everything worth keeping was already hers. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, if any part of it sounded like something you have lived, leave me a comment. Tell me where you are. Tell me what you are carrying. Tell me what you are walking away from or walking toward. I read every single one. If you are not subscribed yet, please subscribe now. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. You did not find this video by accident.